All righty then, let's kick off this bonus huddle. I'm excited to welcome Dalia Feldheim, a former CMO, a current leadership coach, and the best-selling author of Dare to Lead Like a Girl, How to Survive and Thrive, here it is, pardon me, in the corporate jungle. Today, we'll be diving into her book, discussing specific actions CMOs can take to become better leaders and exploring some of the real life examples she shares in her book, which, by the way, Dalia, I did read last night and really enjoyed it. So
you finished the whole thing in one night?
I know. Yeah, you know.
Okay, here's your test. Are you ready?
Yes. Please no. So we'll be a quiz afterwards. So anyway, how are you and where are you this fine day?
I'm amazing. I'm in Israel, where I moved a year and a half ago, and I'm actually with wet hair because I just went swimming in the ocean here.
Oh my gosh.
Work-life balance. I started working with a team in Australia this morning at, what was 5 a.m. my time. So those are my days these days. Australia, US days, whatever works.
Well, and it's first of all, jealous that you got to swim in. That's awesome. In the ocean. I can imagine that off of Tel Aviv. I've been in that ocean in the Mediterranean. Anyway, now it's a perfect segue because my first question for you is that you've lived all over the world. I mean, Israel now, but Singapore, Switzerland. I think did you live in India too? Are you
Moscow? No, I worked a lot in India, but I never
worked a lot in India, and you lived in Moscow, right? So I'm just curious how these experiences sort of contributed to your approach to leadership.
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, I'm really lucky because I have a crazy entrepreneur husband. And I think each one of the moves was an adventure in its own. I remember the very first, actually moving to Geneva. So I was studying psychology and business here in Tel Aviv University. And I knew I wanted to do psychology. And then, everyone from my business school came to me and said, you're not going to the P&G interview. I mean, first time P&G is in the campus. I went, I applied, I got in. And then I came to my then boyfriend of 2 years and I told him, hey, I got accepted to P&G in Geneva. He's like, wow, amazing skin, let's go. So we went to what was supposed to be 1 year. My parents are British, okay? So I always joke and say I'm made in England, born in Israel, because it's true. My mom actually moved over pregnant. And I never thought I would be outside of, for so long. But I started in Geneva. It was supposed to be a year. After a year, they told us, make a life in Geneva. You're staying here. And we're like, okay, we love it. And then same was with Moscow. I mean, the opportunity came up. I remember my husband started kind of working in another company and they really wanted him in Moscow. So I came to my company and I said, hey, I'm open. A week later, I get a call. We have a role for you. You want to take it. That was Moscow. And then Singapore was the craziest. My boss was over for dinner one night and we love the adventure. We love developing markets. We love, changeover, complete, fixing, right? A country, a company. So I remember Asia was kind of where it was all happening. And I kind of jokingly told my boss, actually it was my husband, wow, we would love to live in Asia someday. And I get a call literally a week later, Dalia, do you still want Asia? And I just said, tomorrow. And he said, okay, that's all I needed to know, and closes the phone. And I'm like, frantically text him, okay, how tomorrow? What are we talking about? He's like, don't get too excited, but there's an amazing role. They want you. And if you get it, you're moving in a month. And we just finished building a house in Geneva, which took all our blood, sweat, and tears. And literally we moved into the house and within a month we moved again to Singapore. So what did it teach me about leadership? Leadership is all about have an idea of where you're heading. Okay, meaning have a game plan, have a vision, have a purpose, but don't forget to enjoy the view and the way, because opportunities get thrown at you. Everyone gets these opportunities. It's just not everyone picks them up, right? So I think that was my biggest learning. And that actually, came from this, hey, great opportunity. Let's see what it entails. And we've enjoyed every single experience.
Amazing. And just a lot of jealousy on my part again. So that's 2 now you're 2 for 2 on that front. But in thinking about one of the things I noticed in your book, you had an advisor, saw someone speak who talked about dreaming big and writing things down and where you want to be in 5 years. And I remember in the book, you mentioned that you wanted to have a lake house in Geneva, and sure enough, it came true. It's crazy.
Yeah, that was a crazy, like I attended a training, very, very young, ABM. I was 2 years associate brand manager, right? P&G has all the acronyms. So I was 2 years in the company, and we had a lecture. And at the end of the lecture, she kind of gave us this little piece of paper. First of all, I remember one side was the credo. They drew a circle in the sand and left me out. I drew a bigger circle and left me in, which I absolutely loved. So it became, a big, inclusion mantra. But then on the other side, she said, hey, write down 5 goals. And I wrote, I want to be promoted. I was very, achievement oriented. So I want to be promoted twice. I want to have 3 kids. And this was in 5 years, right? I went, and I was kind of running out of ideas, and she's like, dream big, dream big. So I'm like, I want to have a house on the lake in Geneva. And I remember, then opportunities came. My kids came really quick. Actually, my 2 oldest are only a year apart. So talk about, it happened, and we're happy. And then I got promoted really fast, and that also kind of happened. And then when we moved to Moscow, that was an expat assignment. So that means, the school is paid, the house is paid. So the first time in our life, we were able to save money. And with the little money we had, we were, my husband actually found this house that was really undervalued because the lady living there refused to leave. And so we bought we started talking with her, and then we bought the house for really, really cheap in these kind of relative terms. And then we befriended her, and we just became lucky because I was pregnant, and she kind of, her heart, she connected with us, and she decided to leave. And as I was unpacking and seeing my kind of 3 children play in the garden of the house we just built, I found that little note, and I just kind of burst into tears. If you would have told me 5 years ago, everything I wrote down will come true, I would have never believed you. And since then, that becomes kind of every training I do, every coaching, etc. Manifest your dream. I'm partly, they say my feet are in the ground, my head is in the sky. I'm part spiritual, part rational, but there's something out there. When you manifest to the universe aligned with a made up mind. So when you manifest something, be surprised what comes up. So that's the story there.
I love that. Now, speaking of feet on the ground, a lot of your stories sort of reference back to being in the Israeli army. And I'm just curious how formative that was for you as a leader, because I think you were a platoon commander. I may have had the title wrong.
Yeah, well, sadly for us in Israel, it's compulsory, right? And girls and men and women, of course. And I always say, I hope my kids didn't have to do it, and that there's global peace. And so for me, especially living abroad, every time people bring in the army, I need to explain it's compulsory. I was not luckily, I was a platoon commander of girls, preparing them for basic training. And I always say that's my crash course in leadership. And there's something really weird in that experience. But at the age of 19, I was in charge of 200, soldiers. And I remember, stories of building motivation. I had a soldier that was really misbehaved. My commander told me, the base commander, okay, the highest rank, told me I need to kind of throw her out of the army or put her in jail. And I decided to have like, we call it a drill, like a sergeant drill, right, with her all night. And we started, and I just became her coach. We were supposed to do these drills, run here, run there. But I was just kind of telling her, hey, you have this opportunity to serve as equal. Forget about the background you came from. Make a difference, And we spent 4 hours. She was, she broke down into tears. And I remember, I'm tearing up just remembering it, right? And I remember the next day, at 4 a.m., we finished the drills. I sent her to sleep. And the next day, I came to, where we were having breakfast. And usually I was a platoon commander, so only my platoon needs to come and, salute. And she basically made the whole base. So maybe, 500 girls stand up and salute. And since then, she became the best soldier ever. right? She was like, and we've been in touch, years later. And I think, many experiences like that just kind of taught me everyone deserves a chance. Everyone is coachable. It's just, how do we get to the right buttons? How, believing in people. And so that was just one experience, but I think, the crash course in leadership, that, you're not a leader unless you have followers. So this means, it's not about managing people. It's about, managing businesses. It's about, leading people that manage businesses. So it was very, motivation and, what can be delivered when you're totally fired up. That was kind of one of my biggest learnings from the Army, and, extremely applicable in the business world.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, the difference in the scenario of being in the Army is that, there's a lot more at stake.
Yeah.
Whereas marketers, we're not, chances are we're not going to be.
Yeah, we're changing lives. I mean, I wouldn't underestimate. I think
well, we may be changing lives, but we're not necessarily putting our own lives at risk.
Yeah.
But I want to go to, so the direct link here to me and your Army experiences is this moment where you're actually targeting young recruits into the Army. And it happens to be the Israeli Army. And I love the story of you writing the letter and so forth. I'm wondering if you could just give a brief share of that.
Wow, he did read the book, right?
There we go. I passed the quiz. Yes.
Amazing. Well, one of my favorite kind of pieces of work that I do today with company is, find your purpose. And I work with companies on, I find that purpose, and that's why it's the first P in my book, of kind of in the framework, because it influences everything else. And when I reflect on my career in P&G, I know why I was on fire. I was on fire because I was completely aligned with my purpose every single day. I knew from day one that it was, about empowering and inspiring, people, right? And I often tell this story of how did I find my purpose for the first time. So I was a platoon commander, and I studied psychology and business and started with P&G. So it was about 3 years after I was a platoon commander that I was an associate brand manager. And, FemCare, so Always, Tampax, and All Days were 70% of our profit. It was a very big deal. And one of our competitors was about to launch into the market, Kotex. And I remember, the first lesson of the best, offense is defense, right? So preparing for that launch, I went and I analyzed where are our weak spots. And we discovered that one of our weak spots was around 18-year-old girls. Now, where are 18-year-old girls in the Army? So I said, okay, why is this happening? We know they start, they make their own money from the Army, and it's not a lot. So they start skimping, right? And buying cheaper brands, and maybe they don't have the resonance with the brand anymore. So I knew I wanted to target these girls, and I knew, I wanted to do it through the Army. So I had to think of an idea of how to be relevant, to how to sell this idea that of sampling to the Army. And, many girls, when they come, a wash bag is really important, because I won't take you all into the detail, but you run into public showers and everything gets messed up and wet, and, it's a mess. So we created this kind of sophisticated wash bag with compartments for your pads and etc. And the Army loved it, and we sold it in. And they agreed to sample every single soldier in the first day of recruitment. Now, a week before we launched the campaign, I kind of really wanted to add something personal. And I asked the agency, and they didn't come up with the perfect thing. So one evening, I was sitting down and I was writing as inspiration for the agency. And I remember, we know the term flow, right? Flow is when we're sometimes called meditation in action, when we're so engrossed in what we're doing, we lose track of time. I was in total flow. I was writing for these girls, really putting myself in their shoes. I remembered saying goodbye to your parents, getting onto the bus, and you're rummaging to what the Army gave you, and you're scared like crazy. Who's going to take care of you? And I spoke about those emotions, and I spoke about hygiene in the Army and why we created this gift bag. But I also spoke about, empowerment and how proud she should be for serving in the Army as equal and, going through this hardship. And I remember I lost track of time, as often happens when you're in a state of flow, and I literally fell asleep. And the next morning, my boss came in and he's like, Dalia, what are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, I just wrote this letter as an example for the agency. And he was like, can I read it? And he read it and he teared up within seconds. And he told me, Dalia, you don't change anything. I want you to sign it, Dalia, with your real name, ex-platoon commander, and we're going to ship it as is. A week later, the campaign went out. And 2 days later, I was called in. I remember it was a Friday. I was called into the service line and they're like, oh my God, Dalia, you have to come here. We're inundated by calls from soldiers and their moms. Soldiers come home on the weekend just to say thank you for being there at such an emotional moment. And for you marketeers out there, I mean, that is the magic of marketing, right? Being there, when and where, with the right message that resonated. And that's when I realized I'm not in the business of selling pads. I'm in the business of women and people empowerment. And I was lucky that P&G enabled me to live my purpose later on with the Always Like a Girl and Russia, Be the Star You Are, and Tampax, where Mother Nature all can advertising awards winning. So, but it all really started by aligning my personal purpose with the company purpose and focusing on the higher order benefit that our brands serve our consumers. So that was kind of a big success factor, I think, in my career with B&G.
Yeah. And, but besides the fact that I'm tearing up as I hear the story, because I can just imagine these young women reading this and the ability to empathize with them because you had been there. And what's so interesting here is that that's in B2B in particular, sometimes it's very difficult to get to that level of empathy. You had already experienced it. So, you had walked a mile in their shoes, so to speak. And it just reminds me in the challenge for the huddlers listening is how do you get to that level of empathy and insight, particularly if you haven't been through their job. And that was not a question, that's an observation. Yeah. And speaking of observations, I did watch your TED Talk last night as well and enjoyed it. And a couple of things struck me, and I'm going to just go stylistic for a moment because I noticed how calm you were and how deliberate and measured. And I'm sure you weren't necessarily calm inside, but you didn't have a single not a non-word throughout the 13 minutes. Oh, wow. And these wonderful pauses. I'm just thinking, oh my God, you must have rehearsed that a million times.
Well, I'll tell you, it's actually the whole story with TED. One of my favorite words or concepts is serendipity. Okay, when you kind of throw your desire out there into the world. So I kind of, I remember when I tell the story that I tell in TED for the very first time, Tal Ben-Shahar, who's Harvard's guru for positive psychology and now a business partner and a close friend, he was sitting in the audience. And at the end of it, he's like, oh my God, Dalia, you need to speak on TED and you need to write a book. And I remember I literally went, me, I'm any girl next door, right? And he said, well, that's why it's so relevant. And so I had this TED goal. And one day my friend told me, hey, they're recruiting for TED, Jaffa, and women, why don't you apply? And then I was in INSEAD that weekend and we were studying really hard and they needed a 5 minutes video. And I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to have time to record a 5 minute. Ping, I get an email. I did some interview for some audition to Women's Day Talk. And this guy sent me my 5 minutes video. So I write back to him. I said, hey, is there any chance you can edit this for a 3 minutes video for me until tomorrow? I want to apply to TED. And he's like, of course, TED, amazing. I sent it to me. I sent it out and then I didn't hear from them. And then my grandma passed away. She was 105. It's a story in its own. I flew to Israel. I land, ping, I get this SMS. You got accepted, but it's under the condition that in 1 week you can be in Israel. And I'm like, surprise, I'm here. So anyway, in the beginning, and for anyone kind of planning to do a TED, I know as marketeers, we're a little bit more comfortable with public speaking, but the TED experience, oh my God, it was a different level. We had 1,000 people in the audience and you know that what you're going to say, I think today 200,000 saw my TED, right? So it's quite overwhelming. So I think the 2-3 ideas that I have for anyone thinking about the TED, well, the first thing, yes, luckily, I mean, we had an agency working with us, and we know that practice makes perfect. Now, I'm not a practice person. I'm a wing it person. Okay. I do public speaking. I have my bullet points. I have a structure, but then I'm like now, right? We're completely fluid and prompted. And yet my coach did not accept that, right? It had to be scripted. And I was like fighting him like crazy. You're killing all my stories. You're killing my flow. And, but we didn't have a lot of time. I think it was a month and a half only. And we worked on it, and he's like, trust the process. So we had that total meltdown. Okay. But then towards the end, and still I would always miss something, a word, etc. But then on the night itself, I mean, what was amazing, and the other big tip, my husband actually went and bought the whole second row, okay, for friends and family. So all of my, I could only see up to row 3, and they were all supportive face. And then there was another speaker that was talking about, underprivileged women, Arab women in Jaffa. And a week before, I realized that they're not actually joining to see her speak about them. So we also kind of donated a few tickets. So the first row was also supporters of these women that came, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm literally talking to friends and family. So that was the second big tip. And then the third one, and there's there's a picture that my coach kind of captured me 2 minutes before, because I'm talking about a sensitive topic. I'm talking about a bully boss. I was shaking. And if you really, really pay attention, the first kind of few seconds, you would see my voice and my feet. I was shaking before going on stage, but I'm a yoga practitioner. I just sat there and I did meditation. And I said, I am going to speak for that one person that this talk would make an impact to the better on. And I'm just going to focus on that one person. And if I change one person's life, right, I change the world. And that's what I focused. I said, forget about the, thousands, hopefully millions that may see it in the future. Focus on that one. So A, practice makes perfect. B, supportive, find a friendly face in the audience, right? Make sure they smile at you often, and really focus on, why are you doing it? Why am I sharing this story? To make, an impact. So one person, so other people don't need to go through the pain that I've been through, and learn from my experience. And I think, when you focus on your purpose, he who has a why can endure anyhow, says Nietzsche. And I guess that gave me immense power.
I love it. Okay. So tissues and tears are a consistent theme from beginning to end of your book, both in terms of an early boss who told you to embrace that, to the later boss who sort of launched your entrepreneurial career, if you will. Connect those dots for us, and then we'll get really into the book. But the first story and the sort of the last one and tissues, I just...
So this actually, actually is the main story that I share in the TED. So 6 months into my role in P&G, I'm a young associate brand manager. And I didn't have a direct boss because he left, and I was reporting directly to the general manager. So I was launching a big initiative, and my product got stuck in customs. So, when you're working 6 months on something and, it gets totally screwed up. And I was invited into my general manager's office to talk about what went wrong, right? And I'm sitting there and frustration is mounting. Now, I don't know about you, but when I feel frustrated, I have a really automatic reaction. A tear appeared in my eyes. That's my reaction to frustration. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, oh my God, I'm in my general manager's office and I'm crying. How embarrassing is that? And I'm kind of frantically trying to regain my composure. And at that moment, my boss, Jim Lafferty, who's a people legend, right? He looked at me, he offered me a box of tissues. And when I regained my composure, he looked me dead in the eye. And he said something I would forever remember. He said, Dalia, don't you ever be embarrassed for crying in the office again. It's a sign of your passion. And passion is your superpower. Do you ever have a boss like that? I'm looking kind of the faces. Wow. I was so empowered, right? And for those 17 years in P&G, I was really lucky to have many managers like Jim that believed in me, sometimes more than I believed in myself, right? But, you know, my career just went from strength to strength. But it wasn't until I reached the lowest point of my career, that I really understood what Jim was talking about. And that's, you know, fast forward 17 years. So I told you I moved from, you know, Geneva to Moscow to Singapore. And in Singapore, I left after 15 years, right? They wanted me in Geneva. My husband opened his company. I decided to take this amazing role as CMO Asia of another Fortune 500 company. Amazing company, beautiful mission. I was brought in to lead 200 leaders around Asia. 1 month into the role, I got a new boss, and he couldn't be more different. Okay. So as you can see, I'm all about passion, right? Creativity, people, and he was all about numbers and scorecard and ROI. And most days the culture was like ROI or you die. Well, anyway, you know, my first encounter, he told me, Dalia, I'm not going to share what you're good at. I find it a total waste of time. I'm only going to focus on what you need to fix. Okay. And he kind of jokingly added, oh, and there's no art in marketing. It's only science. You just didn't get it yet. So you guys in marketing, you probably felt, you know, literally it was like, I see your eyes kind of rolling, right? It was like stab and turn. Anyway, that day I was in his office and he was giving me feedback. Now I love feedback, right? We used to call it tough love. If you, you know, heard that term, right? Feedback that is direct and honest, bring it on, don't sugarcoat things, but, you know, feedback that comes from a position of care. Well, that day there was no love in the room. It was just really denigrating, humiliating, belittling, you know, the worst that feedback can be. And I'm sitting there and I'm holding it in and the frustration is mounting. And then he starts offending my team. And I don't know about you, but that's when I became a lioness, because, you know, I knew how hard they worked. And I was just so angry and so frustrated. A tear appeared in my eyes. Now, at that moment, he smiled and he offered me a box of tissues. And for a moment, I had that warm, fuzzy feeling, remembering my first boss, Jim. But then I kind of raised my eyes and I noticed something weird about his smile. And he turned around the tissue box. And I couldn't believe my eyes, because on the other side was a handmade sticker he prepared in advance, which read Dalia's tissue box. And you need to see your faces now, because, right, this is like, and that was my reaction, right? That was, you know, it was a joke, right, for him, right? He was preparing, he was doing everything he could to make me cry and thinking that he's funny. And I can tell you, you know, in a very weird way, as you said, and I say in the book, you know, if I meet him today, I'm going to say thank you, because in the weirdest way, I mean, I stayed there for 3 years, right? I'm a feisty little one. I kept on saying, you know, I'm not going to quit. Why should I quit? He should. You know, I hired people. I loved what I was doing. And I tried everything I knew in my toolkit, you know, fight, flight, freeze, humor, coaching. I quickly realized you can't coach someone that doesn't want to coach. And so the end of the story was, you know, luckily for me, I attended a P&G alumni, so my previous company, and I walked into the room and I realized, whoa, this is what culture should look like. I'm in a toxic environment. I realized I'm a frog in boiling water. And I decided to leave. And then, you know, I had an exit interview and he left a few months later. But yeah, in the weirdest way, you know, this kind of experience, when I left, I said, what a waste of human potential, right? In one company, I was a rock star. In the second, same person. What a waste of, you know, they thought I delivered. I knew I gave them 10% because I was always busy, you know, defending myself. So that's where I decided to, from seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly, work with companies to bring more of the goods and less of the ugly that sadly we see way too much in the corporate world today. So that's kind of what led me into what I'm doing.
So one of the observations that I think is so interesting and is that lean into strength, not weaknesses, and how that is such a, you know, important part of the philosophy in your book. And obviously your boss at this pivotal moment was doing the opposite. I'm curious in terms of that, I'm thinking even at the most basic level. I remember coaching, you know, 7-year-old soccer kids. And, and when they talked about the compliment sandwich, hey, you did a great job running around that. Next time, try this. And, oh, you did a great job. Talk a little bit about philosophically embracing weaknesses and just sort of and trying to get people aligned with their embracing strength and getting your team people aligned with their strengths and not worrying about their weaknesses.
So it's in 98, Rath and Clifton basically wrote the book and Now Change All the Rules, and they basically asked over 3,000 leaders around the world, 3,600, what's more important, strengths or weaknesses? And 60% said weaknesses. In some cultures like Asia, 80% said weaknesses. But what they found in that research, interestingly enough, those remaining 40% that said strengths are more important, they were 2 times more likely to succeed, okay? And the whole logic behind it is that strengths strengthen us and weaknesses weaken us. It takes so much more effort to move from a weakness to a neutral than, to move from a neutral to a wow. I like to use the analogy sometime with my students of a sailboat, okay? So your sail is your strengths. Holes in that sail are your weaknesses. Can you ignore those holes completely? No, right? You need to attend to them. But if you sit there closing all your holes, but you don't raise the sail, will you go anywhere? No, right? So what you need to do is focus on raising your sails while you find ways to close those holes. So it's not completely ignoring your strengths, but whether you can do a training, whether you can hire someone, that complements you for the strengths, as long as your energy, okay, is about raising that sail. Your energy is where your passion is. So, very simply, I work today with companies on, understanding people's strengths. As a leader, this is a core skill, because when you're aligned on your strength and you're aligned on your purpose, and even if you find a passion project that you do, everyone can find a project within a company, especially in the big companies, right? I just did a huge project for Google in Europe. And initially, they were a little bit worried on finding their purpose. People will leave. So we started with personal purpose, and then, finding their strengths, aligning it to your purpose, and then aligning that to the company purpose. And as a result, they came out each with 1 or 2 projects that kind of are more aligned to their strength. They had the line manager discussion, and instead of spending, often our brains are wired to negativity. That's another dynamic. Okay, why is this? It's hereditary, right? When we were in the woods, we need to kind of pay attention to a bear coming, right? So we hear negative feedback 4 times louder than positive feedback. Think about yourself. Think about your report card. As parents, it's end of year. Your kids get this amazing report, and then where does your eye go? To the less than perfect. Or you get this holistic feedback, and immediately you're focusing on what you need to fix. Well, that is the big mistake, because as when you spend your energy, everyone has a gift, and that gift is different. So my boss was determined that, I was too creative and not good enough in process, and I need to learn 6 Sigma like he did. And he wanted me to be like him, where I was a completely different animal. And actually, leaders should hire people that are completely different. The role of the leader, and my first boss in the company used to call it, put in the right people on the right seats in the bus. You need the different skills. You need the alignment of, strengths of other people. But what do most people do? They hire people that are similar. They want everyone to be like them. And, we're losing all this creativity and innovation that comes from the diversity, that comes from, the 2 times more productive employees when they're focusing on their strengths. So, this theory of Rath and Clifton, and I was lucky to meet Clifton a few months back, this Bible, it became a Bible for people management back in 1998. And still, I think it was 2007, they did another research, and still only 30% of employees were aware of their strengths, and only 17% said they use their strengths every day. So I always say, and that's the beginning of the book, if we were able to bring employees to be saying, more employees to be saying, yes, I know what my strengths are, and I use them every day, wow, the exponential kind of burst in potential. So that's why, strengths is always kind of the beginning of what I start with.
Yeah, and I love that. And I know the audience, folks, CMOs are thinking about that now and assessing their individual teams right now. And you can't help but do it. I'm wondering if I have so many more questions that are specific, but just from a broad leadership standpoint, you have your 5 Ps. Can you just sort of share those? I know the first one is purpose, and we've talked a little bit about that, but just put a framework on this. We obviously can't get through all of it, but just quickly go through the 5 Ps.
Yeah. So, when I talk about Dare to Lead Like a Girl, it's a provocation, of course, right? It's based on the, it's a homage to the Always Like a Girl campaign, but it's also based on research that shows that, actually women scored really well in, better than men in 17 out of 19 leadership traits. And that's changed over time. And that's because the world has evolved. And today in the work from home, work remotely, the need for agility, actually those soft skills, right, are more important than ever before. So first, the premise for the book is the corporate world is suffering. Okay, 1 in 4 experience acute anxiety, 87% are unhappy at work. So the world is suffering. We know what it takes to win. And this is connecting to these more, historically considered feminine. It's not feminine versus mass. It's not men versus women. Sorry, there's no such thing as a man versus female brain. We all have inherently both masculine and feminine leadership traits, but we suppress those leadership traits as we grow, as we get into corporate. And that's why it's not Dare to Lead Like a Woman, but Dare to Lead Like a Girl, right? So this is about connecting, and in one sentence, it's about leading from your heart. It's knowing that, you need your hands, the skill, you need your head, your strategic kind of ability. That goes without saying. But the difference between a manager and a leader is heart, right? So what does it mean? The 5 P is just a way coming from marketing for us to be easy to remember. So the first P is, we talked about it, purpose, aligning to the strengths. The second P is perspective, and this is all about our mental strengths, because it's all between our ears. It's all this growth mindset. It's how we learn from failures, etc. The third P is power up. It's all about energy. We're seeing the disease of the 21st century is burnout. Why? You can't pour from an empty jug. So what do you do to build energy? If it's swimming in the ocean, or, eating healthy food, or sleeping properly, or, what do you do to fill your jug? I always say positive psychology is not about the glass half full. It's knowing that you have a whole jug of resources that you can use. So what are you doing about filling that jug, right? So that's kind of the third P. I call it power up. The fourth P is the most important, and look around you. Okay, that's you guys. It's people, it's relationship. And I always say there's no ROI without people. It's not return on investment. It's return on interaction, because we know what drives businesses is relationship. Even, as marketeers, I talk a lot about empathy. Empathy is a core skill. Even for innovation, it's not only for relationship. Think about it for innovation. All of my success was because I was able to put myself in others' shoes, to think of unmet needs, whether you're B2B or B2C, right? Even if you're B2B and you're selling to, a client, understanding their needs, how can you uniquely meet them? So that's in all the, people and relationship. And then the last P is around positivity. And positivity is not about being happy all the time, but about, being emotionally, I call it emotionally brave. So giving ourselves the permission to be human. Okay, it's okay not to be okay. And Tal Ben-Shahar, my mentor, often kind of says, who doesn't have negative emotions? Only psychopath or dead people, right? So if you're sad, that's great news. But positivity is really about this notion. I mean, I tell the story that my bully boss used to call me Miss Kumbaya. He thought I was too positive. And when I started studying positive psychology, I actually learned that it's good for business to be Miss Kumbaya. It's good for business to be positive. Our brain in positive state is 31% more productive. It's not that success leads to happiness. Okay, Sonia Lubomirsky, amazing research. It's the opposite. Happiness leads to success. happier people or more successful in work, in relationship, or healthier. So how do we kind of lead in like a girl is from personal purpose, perspective, energy, people, but also how do we bring our emotions to the workplace? It's okay to cry in the workplace. It's my way of dealing with frustration. You deal by slamming the door. Why is that really, way of behavior better than, others? So now I say, I'm not embarrassed. This is my way of showing my frustration. Give me a moment. Let's continue this conversation tomorrow. And then I would say, hey, you triggered me yesterday. This is why. This is really important for me. Okay, so sometimes I talk about it as talk emotions unemotionally, right? Process them, and turn it into a win-win. And I always say there's no challenge with conflict. Conflict means that something is really important for you and really important for me. So how do we turn conflict into an opportunity for connection through curiosity, right? So, hey, that triggered you. What's going on? This triggered me. This is really important. Let's find a win-win. So that's kind of the essence.
No, that's a great summary. And I think the one big surprise for me is your book was more, I'm going to describe it as a self-help on a very broad level. It's like sort of how to sort of live a more fulfilling life is really where I got it. And there's one point where you talk, and I have to go here, which is you list all your roles: mother, wife, friend, athlete, employee, and you describe what it means to be good enough in these areas. And I really appreciated the good enough phrase, because there's this other phrase out there: how you do one thing is how you do everything. And that drives me bonkers, because you can't do everything perfect. If you tried to do everything perfect, you would simply go insane. So can we just talk about the good enough factor? And I really appreciate that in the context of all of the roles that you described you had.
So I was a gymnast. Okay. A gymnast is all about perfection, is getting a total. So I'm a perfectionist. I started my career as a perfectionist. And I think many of our kind of alpha, go-getters, right? We're perfectionists. And I would stay up all night, but I was also aligned to my purpose. So that was an extra kind of energy. And I remember when I was mom, I really wanted to be the best mom I could be, the best employee I could be. And actually the lesson came, I think I mentioned this story also in the book, but the lesson came from my 8-year-old. So he was in a school play, and it was really important for him. My husband was abroad, and he said, I really want you to come. I mean, he was a small role. I think it was a tree. And
he was a tree.
Japan.
That's what you said in the book. He was a tree.
So a few weeks before said him, of course, I'm going to be there. And a few weeks before, we were told that the CEO is about to come, and I am chosen to speak to him about the FemCare business. Oh my God, wow. It's a kind of important career moment. But I knew I had to be at school. So I went to my president, who was amazing. And I said, listen, I'd love to speak to the CEO, but can I be first on the agenda? My kid has a school play. I have to be there. I promised him. And he's like, sure, no problem. He put me first on the agenda. And as things always happen, the CEO's plane got delayed. And he arrived an hour before I had to be at school. And I gave my talk, rushed to school with my hair and my high heels, rushed into the hall to see my little tree walk off stage. He just finished his role. I was in tears. I think he could hear me, Ailey. I missed him. I was crying the whole way home, right? The guilt was like overwhelming. And then when we arrived home, Leon turns to me and he says, Mom, you're not always perfect, but I see you really try. And that moment, I realized, right, that we can't always be perfect, but we can try, and we can choose what's really important and what really matters. And I always say, be there for the moment that counts. Okay, so I did my best to be there for birthdays and school plays, even if it's going to the president, but even more importantly, making your moment you're there count, being present. So many of us working parents come home and we're constantly on the phone, or we leave early to take them to the park, and then we're kind of in the park, but we're swinging and on the phone. So that kind of framed my experience where good enough is good enough. And, there's a whole kind of system. Actually, it was my first boss, Jim. You can only do 5 roles right. So choose what are the 5 most important elements for you. And maybe it means, sports was really important, parenting, right? My career, friends. My parents were away, at that stage. It was kind of talking to them maybe less, or as friends, really focusing on the few that I'm going to invest in, or not being kind of, I would love to be, on all these different roles. So I think that's another important dimension, that we redefine success differently. And I remember my last boss, one time he told me, you're the only one, when I say it has to be delivered by 10 in the morning, that, don't deliver on time, right? I come back and I say, yeah, it's not realistic. And I have other things in my life, and work is important for me, but family is too. So here is what I'm going to do. And it would be at 12, and tell me if it's absolutely diehard critical. And, it's just this notion of, I need to understand the logic. And if he tells me it's absolutely critical, die hard, because I need to submit the report by 10, I will deliver it at 10. But if I don't understand the rationale, we work together to negotiate and find a solution. So, work is important for me, right? But, on your deathbed, you're not going to say to yourself, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't stay some extra hours at work. So, have perspective, right, of what really matters, and make, redefine success holistically.
Yeah, it's funny as you're telling the story, I was thinking of at my son's high school graduation. There was a gentleman who was either on the phone or looking at his phone the entire graduate, didn't look up once, even when his kid was at the very top. And I just thought, oh, dude. So
kids remember that.
Oh yeah,
okay?
but yeah, they do. They do. But so we were going to run out of time really fast, and I just want to make sure that we've covered. So unique challenges that women face in the corporate world, particularly in marketing and leadership role, and how you see them navigating these challenges.
So, the premise of the book is a provocation, right? And Rasi Sota, my friend, kind of together with Nili Maba, talk about a model. We have positive feminine, okay? This is, empathy, intuition, teamwork. We have positive masculine traits, okay? Logic, direction. A good leader has to have both, okay? If I'm only in my empathy, I need to float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Sometimes I need to step into my assertive, okay? So a good leader has to have both elements equally. Now, the issue with the business world is that it's collapsed into what Raj calls wounded masculinity, where it's power over people versus power with people, competition versus collaboration. So these are some of the challenges. And, Paul Polman, who many of you know, the ex-CEO of Unilever and one of my first bosses in P&G, he actually was speaking, and he said, instead of trying to fix women, let's try and learn from them. And the business world kind of says, oh, and there's so many hurdles. And we say the issue is with the woman. And yes, there are elements there. There's a confidence challenge. Okay, we were raised to please, to be kind of good with other people. So when we behave out of character, okay, the same behavior is categorized as, he's the boss, he's assertive, or bossy for women, bitchy, okay, same behavior. Or same with prides, okay, we were raised, boys were raised on pride, we were raised on not. So when we kind of self-promote, oh, she's a self-promoting, right? Exactly same behavior. So there are these biases out there, many of them, okay? If anyone think he doesn't have a bias, do the implicit test, you will see we all have bias out there. My favorite one, so McKinsey just did this amazing research they do every year on the states of women. And there's so many biases, even, that women talk more than men, okay? When research shows they talk exactly the same amount of words. And so women are caught mid-sentence, 2 times more often than men. That is kind of crazy, right? And today when I work with companies, I have them sign a pledge at the end. If you're seeing someone being cut mid-sentence, that's when you intervene and say, hey, you were cut before, what did you want to share? Right? Making the space. And so there's these biases. We have imposter syndrome, okay, where it is more associated with women, but men experience as well. 50% it's the likelihood in men and 70% with women. Imposter syndrome is this belief that success are external and failures are internal. So yes, there's work we need to do internally, but the issue with the corporate world, why we don't have more women, is not sitting with the women, it's sitting with the environment. The environment is what needs to change, because we're seeing our current way of leadership, this wounded masculinity, is not working. We're seeing, right? 1 in 4 experience acute anxiety. And with COVID, the great resignation, the great breakup, which we're seeing women leaving in buckets, or the silent resignation where you're staying there, but you're leaving your heart at the doorway. So the current way of working is not working. The current kind of environment is not working. So the book is about kind of reshifting it, okay? It's a provocation for all men and women to connect to those softer skills and dare, because it takes courage, right, to kind of shift the environment. So my mission, if you like, is humanizing the workplace, because those are the skills of the 21st century. And I'll just share as an anecdote, I'm really optimistic. And, when the TED came out, I had thousands of women that were inspired to take action. I had men, one guy called me and told me his favorite employees started crying in the office the next day. And usually he would be really embarrassed, but now he had a textbook, right? He said to her, wow, I see you're really passionate. How can I help? But the craziest call was from this guy in Australia who called me up and he said, Dalia, I realized I'm an asshole. What can I do? Okay. So the environment needs to change. It's in a dire state. We're in a leadership crisis like never before. Okay. The Y generation, the Zoomers, okay, the younger generation will not pick up with some of the, sorry language, what we accepted. If we're not connecting them to their purpose, if we're not bringing empathy to the workplace, you're not a leader if you don't have followers. So if you're not leading from the heart today, my good news for you is that all of it is teachable. All of it, is coachable. It's just your mindset and your decision to say, hey, people before profit, because when I take care of my people, the profit takes care of itself. So that's kind of the notion. It's the 21st century. We're not a production line anymore. It's all about productivity. It's all about when I talk with CEOs and I tell them, oh, I teach happiness. And they're like, Dalia, what fluffy business is that? That's when I bring him the research. $7 trillion is what it's costing us today, stress at the workplace, absenteeism, silent resignation, etc. So it all goes down to the bottom line. It's all about productivity, but it's how you deliver productivity through the hearts of your people. So put the hearts of your people in the heart of what you do.
Wow. Well, that's an amazing summary and perfect timing, and connecting productivity to happiness is sort of the billboard here for me. Is if you talk to your employees, and in fact, there's going to be this direct correlation between how do they feel the purpose of the organization? Do they feel empowered? Do they feel, and that once they're feeling in the connection to you in that sense, your productivity numbers will soar, which I appreciate. So talk a little bit about your latest venture in Uppiness and what you're doing there.
So I started to turn the university course into a corporate course, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Meta. It's a 6 months long course. I call it from manager to leader. I either do it co-ed or women only. But, I was looking for a fun way to bring it all together. So after we learn all these positive psychology interventions, how can we make it tangible? Because I'm a coach. It's all about tangible. And that's when, together with my partner, Oren Appel and Tal Ben-Shahar, I brought him in. We created Uppiness. And Uppiness is an online game. Okay, why game? Because from the knowledge retention pyramid, we know the best way to learn is to teach, and the second best way is to play. And we don't play enough in the corporate world. So it is a game, an online hybrid game, where you can solve we code it into the game. We look at the EES of that specific team, and we choose 10 challenges that team is dealing with, culture challenge. We code them into the game, and then you pick up a card. It could be yours, it could be other person's, and the other people, get cards with solutions from the world of positive psychology, and they need to pitch their solution to you. You need to reflect on your strengths and choose it. So what we're seeing is employees love, they're talking real issues, it could be bullying in the workplace, but it's hidden behind the game, right? And then they get all these advice from, and they learn to ask for advice, to get different perspective, etc. So it's a way of graduating the course, but we have over 100 trainers around the world that are ready to kind of train from Mexico to China in many languages. Because as I told you, I am on a mission to humanize the world of business. And, it takes all of us together, but there is hope, and it takes courage. And the interesting element there is courage is actually, and this Paul Polman told me, it's the most misunderstood word. It's not about making decisions that others don't. It actually comes from the French word cœur, which means heart. Courageous leaders are those who lead from the heart. So that's what Uppiness and Dare to Lead Like a Girl is all about.
I love it. Perfect. Well, Dalia Feldheim, thank you so much for joining us today. We've included a link to the Uppiness game. Folks can obviously find you on LinkedIn, and really appreciate your thoughts today.
Thank you so much. Lovely. Thanks for all the kind words. And do feel free, connect on LinkedIn. And if I could be of value to you or your team, let me know. Thank you so much.